Hello, welcome to episode 3 of The Martial Truth. Why train weapons? So, some of the commenters have asked me to talk about my experience with training in weapons and the various weapon systems I've trained in. First off, for me, the importance of training in weapons is quite simple. When you're training in weapons, I'll give you an example like Matayoshi Kobudo. You have many different weapons in the system. Sai, Tunkwa or Tuifa, Bo, Nunti, Nunchaku, Kama, Gua, right? Eiku, okay? Saruchin, all right? And there's a few others, okay? And then when you add other weapon systems I've done, like Shindo Muso-Ryu Jodo, you have the 4-foot Jo, you have the Tanjo, which is the walking stick, right? You're learning how to use the short sword, wakizashi, and the katana, right? Then when I add Katori Shinto-Ryu into that training, we're looking at Kenjutsu, Iai-Jitsu, Bo-Jitsu, Naginata-Jitsu that I've studied so far, okay? So there's more aspects. There's So-Jitsu, which is spear in Katori Shinto-Ryu, and Shuriken, several other weapons, but I'm not there to start learning those yet. So I was once asked by a senior karate sensei, why do you waste your time practicing Kobudo? And my response to him was two things. One was, keeps me incredibly physically fit. When you're manipulating all these different weapons with speed and power, you're working all different small muscle groups in the body that keeps your body very supple, and fit, okay? And there's a big component to that. I mean, too often we see a lot of our senior martial artists, the higher rank they go up, the belt seems to have to go up in size also. So as I've gotten older, I've tried to avoid that and keep myself in pretty good physical condition. And the study of Kobudo, of weapons, has helped that, all right? The other thing is the study of weapons. It's one thing when we're doing empty hand arts, but now when an implement is placed in our hands and we have to work on the coordination of actually utilizing the weapon in conjunction with our body, using proper body mechanics, this is a very difficult thing. So it adds another aspect to the training that I think is very important. The key is for myself, my initial foray into weapons was Iaido. I started my Iaido training when I was about probably just shy of my 17th birthday. So I was very young. I was traveling into New York City to train in Iai, which at that time was Musoshinrin-ryu, Iai, and Setegata. I hold the rank of Shodan under Takeshi Mitsuzuka in Musoshinrin-ryu. Although I do not practice that art anymore, I haven't practiced it for a long time. But I did practice it seriously. You can see some videos of me practicing that art on the YouTube channel if you're interested. Again, learned a lot. It was good. As I moved along in my jiu-jitsu training, jiu-jitsu also has Iai-Jitsu. When I began to learn the Iai-Jitsu of the Sosuishi-Ryu, I found that to be a much more compelling art, much more combat oriented. It just made a lot more sense to me, so I focused my study on that for a very long time. And that art we call Koshi no Mawari, right, around the hip. It's unique in terms of the way we manipulate the sword around our waist as we draw. So that was my initial foray into weapons. Then from there, as my training in Isshin-Ryu karate progressed, in Isshin-Ryu we train in 4 different weapons: Bo, Sai, Tuifa, and Nunchaku. Bo, Sai, and Tuifa all have kata. Nunchaku doesn't really have a formal kata in Isshin-Ryu. There are some kata that the Isshin-Ryu guys will do. But when I asked Master Shimbuku, he said those 4 weapons were in Isshin-Ryu. So I started to learn Sai, Bo, and Tuifa early. I discovered as I progressed in that training that there was something lacking in the way I had been taught the Isshin-Ryu Kobudo. I just think people weren't there long enough to really learn the Kobudo. So I decided to seek out, and someone suggested that I train in Matayoshi Kobudo with a Japanese instructor. That Japanese instructor, after a few years, I realized was not what he claimed to be. I was going to Okinawa in 1997 to demonstrate at the grand opening of the Okinawa Budokan. I was demonstrating Sunsu Kata for Master Kichiro Shimbuku's dojo in Okinawa, representing Isshin-Ryu. While I was there, I took 2 weapons seminars. I took the Ryukyu Kobudo with the Agamini group in the morning, and I took the Matayoshi Kobudo seminar in the afternoon. Ryukyu Kobudo, the lineage is through Isshin-Ryu, Taira Shinken, and the Matayoshi Kobudo, I was already ranked, I think, Nidan in Matayoshi Kobudo. So afterwards, I approached Gakiya Yoshiaki Sensei and said I would like to come train with them. And that began my training with Gakiya Sensei, which I had a many years relationship training with Gakiya Sensei until sadly he had a stroke about a little over 10 years ago, and he retired from teaching. Okay, so that's basically how I wound up in terms of initially my foray into weapons. Also, I started training in Shindo Muso-Ryu Jodo at a very young age. Again, I was still a teenager when I started training with that. I didn't last long, so I kind of stepped away from it, and then I went back to it, and I trained seriously in Shindo Muso-Ryu for many, many, many years. Achieved the rank of Sandan, tested in front of the All Japan Kendo Federation Jodo Division 3 times in Japan, achieved the rank of Sandan. Currently, I don't train in Jodo anymore. I've just decided to focus more on, in terms of Koryu, my Katori Shinto-Ryu training. I'd always had an interest in Katori Shinto-Ryu. So in Katori Shinto-Ryu, Pat McCarthy was coming to my dojo to do a seminar on the Bubishi. I knew he had trained with Sugino Yoshio, and I'd asked him if he could do an introduction to Katori Shinto-Ryu. He did a 3-hour introduction into Katori Shinto-Ryu, teaching us a couple of the Iai Kata, some of the Kamae, and also the first Kenjutsu form, what we call Ikajo, right? So I learned that, and then after a few months, discussed it with my students, and we decided we wanted to get more serious with the training. And McCarthy Sensei was nice enough to call and reach out to Sugino Sensei, and we made the trip to Kawasaki, Japan, myself and like 8 of my students, and we traveled to Kawasaki to train in Katori Shinto-Ryu with the master himself, Sugino Sensei, and fantastic. Really opened my eyes in terms of swordsmanship and fighting with the weapons. I'd never done much Kenjutsu, so for me this was fantastic. I had studied Yagyu Shinkageryu for a couple of years in New York in the dojo where I was the only non-Japanese that was training. Everybody else in the school was Japanese. So I did do some Yagyu Shinkageryu, but I'm doing Katori Shinto-Ryu now 15 or 16 years, so it's a little bit more serious. It's a more serious study. I get to, in general, see Sugino Sensei at least once a year. I've been to Japan several times to train with him, and it's been fantastic. It's a very old school, roughly 600 years old. So as far as the weapons training, one of the things that I find interesting, I study both Okinawan, Japanese, and Chinese weapons. In the Chen style Chaijuchuan practical method, we have straight sword and broadsword, and we also have the staff. So the thing that runs through all 3 cultures is obviously the staff. And if you want to include the spear in that, you can do that also, because again, the staff, you just put a blade on the end of it, and now it's a spear. And it's interesting, I like to see the common threads that run through these arts. I'm not someone that's going, oh, well, this one does this much better. This one, not so good. No. I try to see the common threads that run through. Well, okay, so they do this way. Why this way, right? So, for instance, in Okinawa, right, the primary weapon you're going to fight against is a bow. So the bow is the primary weapon in Okinawa. But in Japan, the primary weapon is the sword. So in most of the Katori Shinto-Ryu kata, especially the beginning kata, right, when you do the bow, you're fighting against the person armed with a sword. When you're doing naginata, you're fighting against the person armed with a sword. Obviously, in Kenjutsu, it's 2 swordsmen squaring off, okay? So each culture has its own emphasis in terms of the main weapon within that culture that you're going to be having to deal with most, okay? And in Chinese martial arts, probably the main weapon would be the spear, right? The spear had a profound impact in China. So again, we have techniques in the straight sword form, which is against the spear or staff, right? There's a famous story with Chen Fa-ke, who is one of the top practitioners of Chen style Tai Chi Chuan. Came from Chen village, taught in Beijing, where a group of bandits, this is when China was a little wild and things were going on. There was a Red Spear Gang, and they were called the Red Spear Gang because they carried red spears. And they would come in and they would terrorize a village and steal and pillage and do whatever else these gangs did. And when they showed up at this one village, the headmasters requested that Chen Fa-ke please go out and face them. They knew he was a high-level martial artist. So he went out and challenged the leader of the Red Spear Gang, and according to the story, which we have several accounts of, right, is he went out with a staff. The Red Spear Gang leader had a spear. Needless to say, in the combat, Chen Fa-ke drove his staff clean through the body of the Red Spear Gang leader, killing him. So, again, we say, well, how is this possible? Well, in the staff training we do in Chen style practical method and all staff training, the line of power is extremely important. So anytime we're doing thrusting techniques, okay, they have to be on the line. And that line of power has to be very clear. So if I'm punching with a tuifa, if I'm stabbing with a sai, the line has to be correct. I can't have the angle of my weapon off, because then it's not going to drive straight in, okay? Obviously, the story of Chen Fa-ke driving the staff through the Red Spear Gang leader is an exceptional example of maintaining that line of power. Okay, so some other things on training. The big emphasis when you train is proper grip on the weapon. Okay, so again, I see a lot of people holding nunchaku near the top of the nunchaku. Okay, that might look cool in a tournament, but that's not how we use weapons. Weapons, we want to take advantage of the reach. Okay, one of the things with weapons training also is it's very important to not just do kata. Okay, kata is a big part of it, but you have to work on like in Okinawan martial arts, what we call kumiwaza, where you're paired off with a partner and you're working the technique. So in the Matayoshi Kobudo, you'll see two-man sets practiced. And the two-man set for Shushi no Kun is pretty much a universal one. You'll see with some variations, but pretty similar throughout all dojo. And then when you get to some of the other two-man sets, those are usually made up by the individual sensei within the dojo. Okay, I know myself. Gakiya Sensei has showed me initial partner stuff, and then I added things to it, and I actually showed him the things I added, and he thought it was good. He actually liked it and said, yeah, no problem, you can do that. So that's what we do. So it's also part of the learning process where you want to create, this again is in the Kobudo, the Okinawan arts, the two-man drills, and figure out how to use the weapons. With the importance of distance, I often see people working on two-man drills where when they're attacking with the weapon, it's nowhere near the target. So if I'm here and my partner's here, all the action is taking place in between us, which it has to be. If someone's attacking and striking for my neck with a sword, well, if I don't move, then the blade should be right here. It shouldn't be a foot in front of me. So this is very important in weapons training, to work on the proper distance, right? In Japanese, what we call mai, right? So the distance, when you're training with a partner, I cannot emphasize how important that is, right? So I know when I train in Katori Shinto-Ryu, and it's my job to cut the opponent. If my job is to cut his do, right, which is near the waist, right, that's what I'm doing. I'm not concerned with his next move. I'm not concerned with my next move. My function at that point in the two-man training set is to cut him. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come in the proper distance and aim to cut him. It's his job to respond properly to my proper attack. I'm not going to cut in deeper because I know on that move he removes his leg. So I'll cut in deeper and still try to get him. Because again, there's no crystal ball. I'm not a psychic. I have to cut for the target that's there in front of me. I don't know. I'm supposed to, in my mind, not know how my opponent's going to respond to that attack. Okay? So in weapons training, this is vitally important. okay? Some differences. So in Okinawan Kobudo, the bow is often used a lot, a third, a third, a third, but it is also extended, okay? A lot of people don't extend it that much. In many of the bow kata, you should also practice the bow with it being extended a lot. So, there's more than one way to practice with the weapon, okay? In Chinese staff and Japanese staff, the staff is used from one end. So you're holding near the end, and you're really having a lot more extension when you're using the weapon. Which again, just cultural difference. Same thing with an Okinawa. You'll see a lot of the bows are tapered. There's probably a couple of reasons for that. Originally, spearhead might have been thrust on it, so it would fit tighter on a tapered bow. There's also some historical evidence that the Okinawans placed a small cannon on the top of a tapered bow and would use that that way too, to fire off the small cannon, which would fire several small projectiles. So it could be that's why in Okinawa you see a lot more use of the tapered bow. I personally, at this point, I've been working more with a straight bow. I think it's good to practice with both if you do Okinawan Kobudo, but it's your personal preference. You can train with either one. It's interesting in facing, in the bow in Okinawa, we're usually facing someone armed with another bow, or sai, or tuifa, or nunchaku, or one of the other weapons, okay? In Japan, if we're using, in Katori, Shinto-Ryu, if we're using the staff, it's usually against a person armed with a sword, okay? In later kata, there may be somewhere it's bow versus bow, I'm not sure. But again, bow used a little different. The staff work in Katori Shinto-Ryu is similar to how we use the staff in Chinese martial arts. Okay, so you'll see where you'll see where it comes with this long line, especially like in the spear work in Katori, and also in the Chen, right? And the Chen, we also do what's called pole shaking, which is to work on the power generation in your body, but it's also working on thrusting on a straight line with that staff. Again, I can't emphasize enough with staff work, being able to thrust that power into a straight line. It's incredibly important. In terms of training, again, you obviously have basics of Kihon, you have kata, and you have partner practice. And it's important to do all three, okay? So, like for instance, in Isshin-Ryu Karate, in terms of the Isshin-Ryu Kobudo, I don't see enough dojo doing a lot of Kobudo partner practice. Serious Kobudo partner practice. The Kobudo in Isshin-Ryu is kind of usually not as emphasized as the empty hand, which is fine if that's what you choose to do. But if you're going to practice the Kobudo, you want to try to practice it correct. Going to a true Kobudo master in training with Gakia Sensei from Matayoshi Kobudo really helped to fix a lot of the things that I felt were not correct in my Isshin-Ryu Kobudo. The other thing is, in training in all these different weapons arts, it's given me a lot of insight into different things. So for me, it's fascinating when I'm training Katori Shinto-Ryu and I'm shown a particular technique, and there's a similarity to a technique, let's say in Okinawan Kobudo, or the way we use the staff in, let's say, Chinese martial arts. Or same thing with the sword. Maybe there's a way we're using the sword in the Chinese broadsword form, and then I'm learning something in Katori, and I'm like, oh, this is very similar to that. And again, it makes me realize that there's only so many ways you can use a staff. There's only so many ways you can use a sword, right? So of course there's going to be a crossover from culture to culture, because again, these arts were all these techniques were figured out in life and death combat. So if one's working in one culture, well, then you might see a very similar technique working the same way in another culture. So this is also an important thing that I've come to understand from my weapons training in all these various arts. Again, the thing too with the weapons training is the posture in the body is incredibly important. The kamae are incredibly important. Working on them properly really helps with your alignment in terms of, back straight, head up, position of holding the weapon, works the strength in your hands. I mean, I cannot say enough in terms of how much I feel the weapons training keeps me physically fit. If I decide to, let's say, for example, I go through all my Matayoshi Kobudo kata, hard, one right after the other. Okay, that's a lot. We're talking 7 bo kata. We're talking 3 sai, 3 tankwa, okay, kama, nunti, gua, eiku, nunchaku, tinbei, which is shield and machete, okay, saruchin, right? So if I decide to work all these weapons, one right after the other, doing all the kata, it's a solid probably hour and a half of doing them hard, one right after the other. That's a tremendous workout, okay? The other day I decided to just do bo kata, all right? So 7 Matayoshi bo kata, 3 Isshin-Ryu bo kata, and then 1 Yamani-Ryu and 1 Ryukyu Kobudo bo kata that I've learned. And I did them all hard, one right after the other, and it was a serious workout. I mean, I'm feeling it in my muscles. I'm winded, right, from doing it hard, but it's fantastic, right? So it pushes the body. So, in terms of going back to what that sensei said to me all those years ago, the other aspect I said, besides the fact that weapons keeps me physically fit, it's a lot of fun. And again, I'm a guy who's totally into real self-defense. If you come to one of my karate seminars, I'm only talking about real fighting. You'll never hear me discuss, scoring a point. That's just not my thing. I train with the weapons as though tomorrow there's going to be a zombie apocalypse and I'm going to have to go out there and fight with a bow or sai or a sword or whatever, So I train with them as though it's still real, because I feel you have to do that to keep your mental focus and keep these arts alive in modern times. But there's so much fun in training with these weapons. It just gives you such a different outlook on things, and it's a lot of fun, For instance, the sword forms, very athletic. I'm jumping around in the air. I'm doing different things. Same thing, with Katori. These forms are athletic. You're moving a certain way with speed and power with the naginata. You're doing spins. I mean, it's just fantastic. It teaches you a whole different way to move your body. I cannot emphasize enough how important I think the weapons training is. And again, if you say to yourself, well, weapons is just something I don't have an interest in, that's fine. I get it. Again, this is a free country. You train in what you want to train in. But for myself, in my experience, the weapons training has really given me insights into my empty hand training, and vice versa. All right. With the working with the weapons, especially if you're using a shorter weapon facing a guy armed with a significantly longer weapon, how you have to figure out how to close that distance to get in to be able to utilize your shorter weapon. In a weapon that involves a lot of a swinging action, like nunchaku, right? Or a saruchin. And for those who don't know what a saruchin is, it's a rope with 2 rocks on the end, okay? When you initially learn it, it's probably more dangerous to yourself than it is to the opponent, okay? So you have to learn how to generate the power through that kind of swinging action. Same thing with the bow. There has to be a path the bow travels. The weapons have to travel a certain path to get maximum speed and power. That's what we want to try to struggle with. And each one of these weapons has its own unique characteristic. And each one of the arts I study, right? So in Isshin-Ryu, we have certain sai kata, and in Matayoshi, we have different sai kata. So you'll see the different techniques and the different characteristics of those particular kata and each individual art. And it's the same thing. If I'm doing Sosuishi-Ryu Koshi no Mawari, right, the Ei Jitsu from Sosuishi-Ryu, it has a different flavor, right, than the Katori Shinto-Ryu Ei Jitsu, right, which is to me a good thing. I'm getting two different aspects. So I'll give you for instance, in the Sosuishi-Ryu Ei, we actually kick. So there's times where we kick the opponent before we cut him, all right? So just a very different type of thing. So you see the link between the actual jiu-jitsu aspect, the empty hand aspect of the art, and the sword aspect, right? And then, so in terms of all these different, each weapon has its own unique characteristic and its own unique way on how you have to use it. So if I'm using the tinbei, which is the shield and machete, okay, well now I have to make sure I'm using the machete in a way that it would cut. So I have to be using it to cut and cut properly. Same thing, if I'm doing the Ei Jitsu in either Katori Shinto-Ryu or Sosuishi-Ryu, I have to use the katana properly so that it would actually cut the opponent. And it's the same thing with the kama. So now you look at the kama as opposed to a sword, and it's a very different cutting action. So you're not cutting with a kama like you are with a sword. So you have to make sure you're using that weapon properly. So all these different weapons and the practice of using them properly becomes of an extremely interesting study. Very interesting study. So it can't be, well, the nunti spear is used exactly like a bow, because it's not. It can't be the bodor is used exactly like a bow, because it's not. All right. Nunchaku are very different from sai. Sai are very different from tuifa. So what you do is you're learning, if you're learning properly. It's not a one size fits all. It's each of these weapons you study has a different characteristic, and it's important to understand exactly how that particular weapon is used. So again, the weapons training for me personally has been an extremely important aspect of my training. I absolutely love doing weapons. I love all the weapons arts I study. I mean, as a teenager, when I first started EI, I was given a video of people practicing Katori Shinto-Ryu. And then, of course, I read all the books by Don Draeger. Right back then, there weren't a lot of books. I read Secrets of the Samurai, and always Katori Shinto-Ryu is mentioned. Katori Shinto-Ryu is mentioned. And, I was lucky enough to study Yagi Shinkageryu for a few years, which was fantastic. But the instructors left, and I was no longer able to continue my training. And, I never thought I'd get to study Katori Shinto-Ryu. And then when finally the opportunity came, I was like, I couldn't have been happier. Sugino Sensei, I highly recommend, if you're looking to study Katori Shinto-Ryu, the Sugino Dojo in Kawasaki, Japan is fantastic. He's obviously the headmaster of the school, but there are many, many sensei in that school, all are very highly skilled and excellent teachers. I mean, I love training in that dojo. The other thing I will tell you, training in that dojo, it's very comfortable. You're not made to feel uncomfortable. It's a serious environment. The training is very serious, but it's a very comfortable, enjoyable experience training there. I just couldn't be happier training in that art for several reasons. One, it's one of the mother arts of Japan. We know it's 600 years old, so it has an incredibly long history. It's fantastic. I say all the time, I'll probably be long gone before I ever finish learning all the kata. There are a lot of kata and a lot of arts within the system, but I'm just happy to learn whatever I can learn. In terms of, Shindo Muso-Ryu Jodo, again, a fantastic art. I got a little turned off by some of the politics, both in this country and in Japan. So I just decided to step away from that and focus my energy on Katori Shinto-Ryu. I still practice Sosuishi-Ryu, both the Ei Jitsu and the Jiu-Jitsu, and obviously I'm teaching Isshin-Ryu Karate and Matayoshi Kobudo, so I'm fully invested in all these weapons arts. I'm teaching Chen style Tai Chi Chuan practical method, so obviously I'm working the staff and the broadsword and the straight sword. So again, the same thing when I'm working the Chinese straight sword and the broadsword. I'm making sure I'm using them as swords. I'm cutting where I'm supposed to cut. I'm stabbing where I'm supposed to stab. I'm not just waving the weapons around in the air. No, I'm using them as weapons. I'm believing that I'm cutting the opponent as I'm moving and doing certain things. So in closing, people ask me to talk about my weapons training. I hope this has given you some food for thought. Again, if you're interested in training, my dojo's in Wittmann, Arizona. I'm available for seminars. I'll be traveling back to New York end of March to do seminars in several of the arts I teach. I'll also next weekend be in Phoenix teaching at the Martial Arts Mashup. So you can look that up on Facebook if you're interested in attending that. I'll be teaching Chen style Tai Chi Chuan practical method on Friday and Katori Shinto-Ryu on Saturday. In the future, probably next time I'll get back to a more self-defense oriented topic. I know some people have been asking about different things. So I think the next podcast I'll do that. But I just wanted to describe my weapons training and the importance of weapons and just how much fun it is. All right. Take care, and I'll see you next time.